We get to the election of 1932, we see a very serious solidification of these two sort of economic ideologies that emerge that we can even see in contemporary America. On the one side, Hoover, um, throughout the 1920s, at his different positions within the party, leading to his presidency, had created this economic ideology that we call supply side economics or trickle down economics. The idea that if you can put money into the hands of wealthy people, business owners, that they will then hire people, and then the money will trickle down to regular people, to workers. It's constructed on this idea um, that the people who create jobs are the people who hire people to do jobs. Um, there is, of course, conflict within this ideology. And one of the conflicts is we we are not a producer driven economy, we're a consumer driven economy, which means that consumers are much more likely to move the economy than businesses for producing things. This issue of supply and demand versus Keynesian economics, which is the other side, which is uh, which is the idea. So Keynesian economics comes into play in the New Deal, in the Great Depression, from Roosevelt. Um, and Keynesian economics argues that when there is diminished demand within the system, that the government should become the consumer of the default consumer. It's in these times that the government should begin to engage in infrastructure development, because the government has deep pockets, but also because the government could then use spare workers who aren't employed otherwise. They could get that work at a cheaper price because supply and demand. They could also get the supplies, the resources cheaper because of supply and demand issues, because there's a recession or there's a slack in supply and demand. They're filling that, and that way they're sort of even things out. And so these are the two ideologies that we see being made. Of Hoover, on the one hand, in 32, saying, look, the economics is the individual's game, and the government shouldn't do anything to help anybody, to help people. But this belied what was actually happening by the government, which Roosevelt points out, that that businesses, that we live in a free market economy, Roosevelt said, until businesses get hurt. And when businesses get hurt, then we don't live in a free market economy anymore. Then the government has to step in and bail businesses out. We live in a free market economy until we want businesses to do something particular, like railroads. Well, let's give railroads land and tell them that if they build track, we'll give them land to do it. And so uh, the government has often been in the business of providing benefits to businesses that they would never provide to the regular worker, to regular individuals. And that was the imbalance that Roosevelt was trying to resolve. And he was arguing that it was this imbalance, this sense that the government was always willing to step in and to help business when business was flagging, but was not willing to do the same for workers. And this is a sort of long time frame that believes that somehow people with wealth are more deserving. This is the social Darwinist ideology that is threaded through American history, That therefore, like when you see wealthy people, those are the winners because they're better than poor people. The reason that poor people are poor, according to supply side economics, to trickle down economics, to conservative economics, is that poor people are poor because they did something wrong. They're doing something wrong. Um, Rather than seeing that inequalities are actually being built by the system itself. That the conservative ideology, economic ideology, was to to pull back some of the progressive regulations of the 1890s to the 1920s. That conservatism in the 1920s began to deregulate, stop prosecuting monopolies and oligarchies, and allowed for much more consolidation of corporations. They also didn't regulate banks or the stock market. And the stock market essentially was a kind of fraud on people. It was a Ponzi scheme that lots of companies were falsifying their balance sheets, that banks were speculating in a real estate, in the stock market. They were lending money to people so they can invest in the stock market. And there was becoming this great imbalance between the wealthy and regular people. 0.01% of the population owned about 40% of all the wealth in America. Not 1%, 0.1%, 1/10 of 1% of the population owned 40% of all household wealth. That's about where we're at today. And 80% of the population, the lower 80%, owned 18% of the population, 1/8%. So 1/10 of 1% owned more than twice the wealth of the lower 80%. And this created an imbalance. If the lower half doesn't have enough money to buy necessities, to pay rent, then they cannot also support jobs. And that's what began to happen. People stopped buying. They stopped being able to afford. People were in this economic exuberance in the 1920s. They felt wealthy. They were buying things. There were so many things to have: radios and cars and appliances and homes, and they were buying past their ability to pay for those things. And eventually, the spigot was going to get turned off, and that's what happened. And so you have this collision, and it creates the Great Depression. And the Great Depression, is the result of many things, but primarily what it was caused by was this economic inequality within the system. Wealthy people can only buy so many gold toilets. And if regular people don't have the money to buy basic necessities, the people who make basic necessities, who run restaurants or make goods that people buy, that people are not going to have the money to buy them, and therefore the people who deliver those goods are not going to have jobs either. And that sets off a cascading. If you want to talk about anything, come to office hours. Otherwise, email me. I try to get back to you as quickly as I can.